The celebration aboard the Velthari flagship Eternal Supremacy had lasted 3 days. Admiral Esreth Khan stood at the observation deck, his four-fingered hands folded behind his back, watching the debris field where Kepler's Hope had once been. From up here, the remains of a human colony looked almost beautiful, glittering fragments of metal and composite, spinning slowly in the dark, catching starlight like scattered jewels. 847,000 humans had lived there. Past tense. A successful operation, said General Verk, stepping up beside him, a glass of ceremonial spirit in hand. 12 minutes from first strike to silence. I expected more resistance. Children rarely fight well, Esreth Khan replied. The Velthari had been spacefaring for 4,000 years. They had seeded colonies across 3 spiral arms, absorbed 6 lesser civilizations into their dominion, and watched a dozen more wither and fade. When humanity had stumbled out of their solar system 180 years ago, blinking, loud, impossibly confident, the Dominion had made a collective decision to be patient. Patient, watchful, occasionally firm. Kepler's Hope was firmness, a message written in fire and debris that read simply, "Know your place." The banquet hall was still warm with laughter and food when Veth slipped away from it. He was a junior intelligence analyst, small even by Velthari standards, with the kind of face that made superior officers forget he existed, which he had always found professionally useful. He returned to his console not because he was diligent, though he was, but because something had been gnawing at the edge of his mind since the operation concluded. A feeling he could not name. The particular unease of a mathematician who has solved an equation and suspects he dropped a digit somewhere. He pulled up the long-range sensor feeds, ran them backward, forward again. There, a contact, emerging from the boundary of human-controlled space approximately 4 hours after the destruction of Kepler's Hope. Single vessel, moving on a direct intercept course for the Eternal Supremacy's current position. He checked the speed reading, frowned, checked it again. The number was wrong. It had to be wrong. No ship that size moved that fast, not without tearing itself apart. Veth sat back in his chair, staring at his screen, doing the quiet math of a man who has just realized the equation he thought he solved has a very large variable he failed to account for. He stood, walked to the banquet hall, and waited at the edge of the Admiral's peripheral vision until Esreth Khan finally acknowledged him with an irritated glance. "Sir, long-range sensors have picked up a contact. Single vessel. Human registry based on drive signature. It's moving toward us at a speed my instruments won't confirm because—" "One ship," Esreth Khan said, not turning from his conversation. "Yes, sir, but the speed reading suggests—" "One ship." The Admiral finally looked at him, and there was something in his ancient, golden eyes that was worse than anger. It was dismissal. "Let it come, analyst. If a human captain is brave or foolish enough to fly one ship into Dominion space after what we just demonstrated, then we will give them the honor of a quick death." He turned back to the general. "Where were we?" Veth walked back to his console. He sat down. He watched the blip on his screen, that single, impossible point of light cutting through the dark with the straight, unhurried certainty of something that does not need to announce itself. He pulled up every publicly available record on human military vessels. It was almost nothing. Human space programs were transparent in their civilian operations, their science vessels, their colony ships, their trade routes. But their military program had, at some point in the last 2 decades, gone entirely dark. No published specifications, no press images, no leaked schematics on intelligence networks, just a wall of classified silence. That silence, Veth now understood, had not been weakness. It had been a door, closed quietly, while something terrible was built behind it. He opened a new file and began typing notes that no one would read until it was far too late. His hands, he noticed, were not entirely steady. Outside the viewport, the debris of Kepler's Hope continued its slow, glittering rotation. 847,000 names, turning in the dark. And something was coming 17 years earlier, Earth, Geneva. The room had no windows. That was the first thing Dr. Mara Solis noticed when she was escorted in, the deliberate absence of natural light, the sense of a space designed to hold secrets the way a vault holds gold. 12 people sat around a curved table, generals, politicians, scientists, all of them watching her with the careful expressions of people who had already made a decision and were waiting to see if she would agree with it. She was 44 years old, lead propulsion architect for the United Earth Defense Commission, and she had been told only that this meeting concerned a priority naval initiative. She'd assumed it was about the Kepler expansion fleet. She was wrong. Secretary General Amara Diallo spoke first. She did not waste time. 3 years ago, a Velthari patrol vessel disabled one of our science ships near the Brennan Nebula. No warning, no provocation. They held the crew for 11 days, then released them with a message. She slid a document across the table. The message said, essentially, that humanity was expanding too quickly, that we needed to, and I'm translating loosely here, stay in our yard. Solis read the document, then read it again. We lodged a formal protest with the Dominion, said Defense Minister Halst. They acknowledged receipt. Nothing changed. Last month, their ships shadowed 4 of our colony transports for 6 days before breaking off. He leaned forward. They are testing us, Dr. Solis. They want to know how much we will tolerate. And what's the answer? Solis asked. That, said Diallo, is why you're here. They showed her the files then. Intelligence assessments, Velthari military doctrine, painstakingly assembled over decades of careful observation, their fleet composition, their weapon capabilities, their tactical philosophy, which was, Solis noted with the detached analysis of an engineer, fundamentally oriented toward overwhelming force against inferior opponents. They had never fought an equal. They had certainly never fought humanity. We want to build a ship, Diallo said. One ship, a vessel so capable, so overwhelming that its existence alone changes the calculus. Not to start a war, to prevent one. She paused. We want something that, if the Velthari ever cross a line they cannot uncross, we can send a single answer. Solis looked at the tactical assessments for a long moment. She was not, by nature, a violent woman. She had spent her career on engines that moved people toward things, toward new worlds, toward discovery, toward each other. The idea of designing something for destruction sat uneasily in her chest. But then she read the intelligence files more carefully. Read about the Thessa Compact, absorbed 50 years ago. The Gret Holly, their culture systematically dismantled after integration. 6 species who had once been nations and were now, effectively, departments of a larger empire. She thought about her daughter, who was 9 years old and obsessed with space and wanted to be an explorer. She thought about what the galaxy looked like if no one ever said enough. She pulled the engineering specs toward her and picked up a pen. I have conditions, she said. First, no weapons system on this ship gets signed off without my review. I won't build something sloppy. If this ship ever fires, it fires precisely. Second, the crew selection process has to involve my team. The ship is only as good as the people running it. She looked up. And third, you tell me the truth. All of it, always. No strategic omissions. Diallo nodded, agreed. Solis uncapped her pen. Then let's talk about what's physically possible, she said, and then let's go a little further than that. For the next 6 hours, she drew. She filled 17 sheets of paper with equations, structural diagrams, drive configuration proposals, weapons geometry. She drank 4 cups of coffee that went cold before she touched them. She asked questions that made the generals uncomfortable because they revealed how completely she had already absorbed the scope of what was being asked. She was not designing a weapon. She was designing an argument, a single, irrefutable statement in the language of physics and engineering that said, "You do not want to do this to us." At midnight, a young engineer named Priya, who had been assigned to take notes, leaned across and whispered, "Do you think it'll ever actually be used?" Solis set her pen down, looked at the 17 sheets of paper, looked at the intelligence files on the Thessa compact, looked at the empty coffee cup. "I hope not," she said quietly. "I built it so we wouldn't have to." She picked up her pen again. "But I built it to win, just in case someone made us angry enough." Priya said nothing after that. She just wrote faster. Outside the windowless room, Geneva was cold and dark and quiet, the city sleeping without the faintest awareness that in a room with no windows, a human being was sketching the architecture of the galaxy's next great shift, one careful, furious, heartbroken line at a time. The first thing the Velthari scout vessel Ketharin encountered was a gravitational shadow on its long-range sensors. This was unusual. Stars cast gravitational shadows, gas giants cast them. Artificial objects generally did not at that scale. Navigator Essiv checked his instruments, rechecked, looked up at his commanding officer with an expression that mixed professional confusion with something else, something that lived below the professional and felt ancient and mammal brain and very simple. "Fear." The commanding officer ordered a visual scan. What the cameras showed did not initially parse. The human vessel filled the sensor frame in a way that forced the instrument package to rescale twice before the full outline resolved. It was dark, not painted dark, but dark the way deep ocean is dark, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The hull was layered, tiered, structured with the brutal purposeful geometry of something designed not to look threatening, but to be threatening down to its mathematics. Gun emplacements ran along its flanks not like decorations but like bones, integral, load-bearing, necessary. Its drive signature was 4 simultaneous fusion arrays, in a configuration Velthari engineering had theorized but never attempted because the tolerances required were considered insane. The Ketharin's commanding officer had 11 seconds between visual confirmation and the moment the human vessel's point defense system classified them as a potential threat. He used 3 of those seconds to realize what he was looking at. He used 2 more to understand that understanding had come too late. He used the remaining 6 to transmit everything his instruments had captured back toward the nearest Dominion relay point. His last transmission ended mid-sentence. The word that was cut off was the Velthari term for wall. On the bridge of the UNSS Thermopylae, the contact alert dismissed itself in 0.4 seconds. Captain Yara Osai noted it without changing her expression. She was 51 years old, Lagos-born, with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that had the particular quality of stillness you find in surgeons and chess grandmasters, and people who have made peace with consequences. She had commanded 4 ships in her career, 3 of them science and exploration vessels, 1 a defense frigate on the Outer Reach Patrol. She had been selected for the Thermopylae 18 months ago, had spent 6 of those months in pure simulation training, 3 months in system trials, and 3 months in the kind of classified preparation that doesn't have an official name on the paperwork. Her crew of 4,200 were the most rigorously selected humans alive, tested not for aggression but for steadiness, the rare ability to operate at the outermost edge of human capability while remaining precise, calm, and fully human. They had been briefed on Kepler's Hope 4 days ago. Every name, every recorded transmission from the colony's final 12 minutes, children's voices mostly, the colony had been young, families mostly, names that took 20 minutes to read aloud and that Captain Osai had read aloud herself, standing in front of her crew, her voice never breaking. She did not need to explain the mission after that. Now she stood at the con and watched the tactical display. 17 Velthari warships had broken formation from a nearby patrol group and were moving to intercept. Textbook challenge posture. Standard doctrine, her own included, called for halting, broadcasting credentials, requesting negotiation. Her hand rested on the con panel. "Captain," said Ares, the ship's AI, its voice calibrated to be calm without being robotic, present without being intrusive. 17 contacts on intercept vectors. Estimated engagement range in 14 minutes. I see them, Osai said. Shall I prepare a diplomatic broadcast? She looked at the tactical display. 17 ships. Behind them, at the edge of sensor range, the position where the Catharin's last transmission had originated. Then she looked at the small file she kept pinned to the corner of her display, a document she had never opened on the bridge before. She opened it now. 847,000 names, listed in the quiet, impersonal format of an official record, and she looked at the first name and the last name and the ones in the middle she'd read aloud 4 days ago. She closed the file. Ares, she said quietly, battle stations. The ship answered. A sound moved through the hull, not an alarm, nothing panicked, just the deep structural settling of a vessel shifting from travel to purpose. 4,000 people moving to their positions with the focused silence of absolute professionalism. Let's go say hello, Captain Osai said. And the Thermopylae did not slow down. Fleet Commander Sir Vareth had fought in 9 campaigns. He had broken blockades, dismantled insurgencies, and once, famously, forced the surrender of an entire planetary defense network with a 3-hour orbital demonstration that required firing exactly 0 live weapons. He was 60 years old by Velthari reckoning, experienced in the particular way that makes experienced officers overconfident, and he watched the approaching human vessel on his tactical display with the calm certainty of a man who has been right before and expects to be right again. 1 ship, he said to his tactical officer. They sent 1 ship. Confirmed, Commander. Single hull. Drive signature is unusual, but... Open a channel, Sir Vareth said. He tugged at his uniform's collar, a habitual gesture of preparation. I'll give them the standard terms. Surrender, withdraw, or face engagement. He paused. Be respectful. They've had a difficult week. The channel opened. He introduced himself. His rank, his fleet, his authority under Velthari Dominion Naval Code. He offered the human vessel 30 seconds to acknowledge and respond. He was, he told them, prepared to be generous. 30 seconds passed. The human ship did not respond. It also did not slow down. Sir Vareth felt the first small needle of something he declined to classify as concern. Distance. Closing at Commander. I need you to verify this reading because the speed calculation is. The Thermopylae opened fire first. What Sir Vareth experienced in the next 11 minutes would take him 3 years, and a memoir he never published to adequately describe. The fundamental problem was that the human ship's engagement range was wrong. Not slightly wrong, categorically, physically wrong in ways that challenged his understanding of directed energy physics. The first salvo struck his lead frigate before his tactical systems had even begun calculating firing solutions, because his tactical systems were using known parameters for human weapons, and the Thermopylae was operating outside every known parameter simultaneously. 4 of his ships were disabled in the first 3 minutes. The disabling was precise, drives and weapons knocked out, life support left intact. Sir Vareth noticed this and did not know what to do with the information. 3 ships attempted a flanking maneuver that the Thermopylae anticipated and responded to with a point defense spread that disabled all 3 without a single hull breach. Surgical. Mechanical. The ship moved between them like it was solving a geometry problem, always exactly where it needed to be, never where they expected it. 3 more ships were destroyed. Sir Vareth was shocked to feel grief about this even as he was frantically coordinating his remaining forces. The Velthari military did not destroy life support unless forced to, and for a terrible moment he wondered if the humans were operating under the same doctrine, or whether those 3 crews had simply caught unlucky fire. He would later learn the answer, and it would change something fundamental in how he understood what had come for them. They had caught unlucky fire. The Thermopylae had tried to disable them first. 10 of his remaining ships scattered on emergency drives. Sir Vareth ordered 2 to stay with him. They did, brave and frightened, and then his bridge took a hit that knocked out primary power and filled the air with the sharp chemical smell of burning systems. In the dim emergency lighting, he opened a channel. "Human vessel, this is Fleet Commander Sir Varath. You have demonstrated your capabilities. State your terms." The response came back immediately. One voice, calm, a human female. "Terms come after. Right now we're still moving." The channel closed. Sir Varath sat in the dark of his damaged bridge and listened to the sound of his remaining fleet limping away and tried to calculate, with increasing failure, what kind of terms a species brought to the negotiating table after sending one ship to do this. He could not calculate it, because he did not yet understand that humanity had not sent this ship to make a point about military capability. They had sent it because 847,000 people were dead, and humans did not, had never, would never, process that kind of grief quietly. The transmission from the Ketharan arrived at Dominion Relay Station Herath 76 hours after the scout ship stopped transmitting. From there it took 40 minutes to reach Velthari Central Command. From there, through channels that were supposed to be secure but, in the way of all intelligence in a galaxy full of interested parties, were not entirely. It took another 3 hours to reach Ambassador Quell of the Thessari Compact aboard her diplomatic vessel, currently in transit between neutral space and a routine conference she was already planning to skip. She read the intercept once, read the engagement record from Sir Varath's fleet twice. Then she sat very still for a long time, which was unusual for her, because Quell was 212 years old and had developed the habit, across 2 centuries of diplomacy, of never appearing to be caught off guard. She was caught off guard. She had watched humanity for decades with the specific interest of a historian who recognizes a pattern. Young species, she knew, tended to be either aggressive or passive when they encountered an established galactic order. They either pushed back immediately, foolishly, and were crushed, or they folded and were absorbed. The interesting ones, the ones that occasionally rewrote the order entirely, were neither. They were the ones that watched and learned and waited and prepared, and then one day appeared on a sensor screen, moving faster than the instruments were designed to measure. She pulled up a star chart, overlaid the Thermopylae's trajectory, followed the line of it with one long finger. It was headed for the Velthari home systems. Not directly, not recklessly, but unmistakably. "Keth," she said to her aide, "please cancel my appearance at the Herath conference and open a secure channel to the Compact Security Council." She paused. "Priority 1. Tell them I need to discuss the humans." In a cantina on neutral station Ferris 9, Commander Drex of the Rithali Free Armada was on his 4th drink when the news feed started running the story. Drex was a mercenary in the philosophical sense, not without loyalty, but with loyalty firmly attached to survival and profit in that order. He had worked for Velthari contracts 3 times in the last decade. Easy money, mostly, because the Dominion's opponents generally crumbled before serious engagement was required. He watched the engagement data scrolling across the cantina's news feed, watched it again, asked the bartender to turn it up. Around him, other patrons, a cross-section of species from a dozen systems, had gone very quiet, which was the tell. When a cantina full of hard-edged spacers went quiet, it meant the news was genuinely significant. He pulled up his communication terminal and sent a message to the Armada's contracts coordinator. It said only, "Cancel the Dominion discussions, starting a new file. Label it, Human Contracts Priority." And in the intelligence bay of the Eternal Supremacy, Veth watched his screen and stopped filing reports. Not because there was nothing to report. Because the ship on his screen had just passed Sir Varath's engagement position without slowing, and he had run the trajectory calculation 17 times, and every time it returned the same destination, and he understood, with the particular cold clarity of someone who has been right about something terrible, that the Admiral was not going to enjoy the next conversation. He also understood something else. He had seen the weapons footage from Sir Varath's damaged hulls, the disabled ships, the precise, almost clinical nature of the engagements, 3 destroyed vessels, 3 out of 17. The rest disabled, life support intact. A species that wanted to slaughter would have destroyed all 17. The Thermopylae was not here to slaughter. It was here to demonstrate. The question, and Veth stayed awake all of that night, staring at his screen, turning this question over and over, was exactly what a species demonstrated when it sent one ship into the territory of an empire, on a straight line, without stopping, without demanding anything. He thought he knew the answer. He hoped he was wrong. He was not wrong. The War Council of the Velthari Dominion met in emergency session, and the first thing Esreth Khan did was wrong. He was angry. This was, for an admiral of his experience, a catastrophic failure of discipline, not because anger is useless in war, but because Esreth Khan's anger was of the particular dangerous species that does not ask questions. It absorbs the fact of being challenged and converts it entirely into the fuel for a larger, more overwhelming response. It is the anger of someone who has never seriously lost, and has therefore never developed the necessary humility to understand what losing would mean. He looked at Sir Varath's engagement report and saw incompetence. He looked at the 10 scattered ships and saw cowardice. He looked at the trajectory of the Thermopylae and saw arrogance that needed correcting. He did not look at the precision of the disabling strikes, did not ask why a ship capable of destroying 17 vessels in 11 minutes had only destroyed 3, did not wonder about the message embedded in that restraint. "Assemble the Grand Armada," he said. "Full deployment. I want 200 ships at the intercept point within 48 hours." The council chamber was quiet in a way that might have told him something if he had been listening. "Admiral," said Councillor Methron slowly, "perhaps we should consider." 200 ships, Esreth Khan said, "personal command." He was, in this moment, making precisely the same mistake he had made at Kepler's Hope. He was thinking in the language of spectacle. He believed the galaxy was watching, and it was. He was right about that, and he believed the galaxy needed to see the Dominion's response be overwhelming, disproportionate, final. What he had not accounted for, because nothing in 4,000 years of Velthari history had prepared him for it, was the possibility that the species he was dealing with was not intimidated by overwhelming force. Was, in fact, somewhat specifically designed to respond to overwhelming force with something that could not be fully classified as either resistance or aggression, but lived in the space between them. Something older, stranger, more human. Stubbornness. The decision, made at a level below rational calculation, to not stop, to not yield, to not accept the premise that size and age and numbers were the things that determined outcomes. On the Thermopylae, Captain Os received the intelligence report of the Grand Armada's assembly from Ares at 300 ship time. She read it at her desk in her quarters, alone, a mug of tea going cold beside her. 200 ships, the full military capacity of a 4,000-year-old empire, assembled and moving to intercept one vessel. She sat with this for a while. Then she called up the ship's current status report. Hull integrity 94%, they'd taken some grazing fire in the Sir Varath engagement that had needed patching. Weapons at full capacity. Drive arrays nominal. Crew, fully operational, rested in rotation, fully briefed. She thought about her crew. 4,200 people who had all volunteered for this mission after the Kepler's Hope briefing. Not one who'd requested a transfer. She had, privately, given every single one of them a window to step back. The official record showed 0 requests. She thought about that for a while. Then she called Park. Lieutenant Commander D. Young Park appeared on her comm screen looking awake. He always looked awake, which she had at various times found admirable and irritating. He read the Grand Armada report she forwarded him in silence. 200, he said. 200, she confirmed. He was quiet for another moment. Then, "You're not turning around." It was not a question. He knew her. 15 years of serving together had made her, in certain functional ways, legible to him, the way a long familiar piece of music is legible. You know where it's going before it gets there. She looked at the corner of her display. The name file, 847,000. No, she said, but I need you and Ares on something. I don't want to fight 200 ships. Park blinked. That seems wise. I want to make fighting us more expensive than whatever they think winning looks like. She leaned forward. I want to give them a reason to stop that has nothing to do with whether they can destroy us. Park was quiet for a long moment. She watched him think. You want to go through them, he said slowly. Not around, through, and then. And then stop, she said, right in the middle. Another silence. Yara, he said, and he only used her name like that when he was being fully, unguardedly honest with her. That is either the best tactical idea you've ever had, or we're going to be a very famous footnote. I'm aware, she said. Get Ares running simulations. I want solutions by 600. She closed the comm, picked up her tea. It was cold, and she drank it anyway, looking at the star chart, at the position of 200 ships moving toward her, at the straight line she intended to draw through the middle of all of them. She did not sleep. She planned. The Grand Armada was, by any objective measure, magnificent. 200 Velthari warships in formal battle array, wings extended, running lights blazing. The collected weight of the Dominion's military power arranged in the overlapping layered formation that had broken every resistance it had ever encountered. Esrethkon stood on the bridge of the eternal supremacy at the center of it and felt the cold, clean certainty of a man who has assembled more force than any problem requires. He watched the single blip approaching on his tactical display. It did not slow. Open a channel, he said. He had a speech prepared, something measured and final, the kind of words that get carved into monuments. He would offer terms the pretense of mercy before the reality of overwhelming force. He would be recorded as having given the humans a chance. The channel opened. He spoke 4 words of his prepared statement before his tactical officer said quietly, Admiral, they've accelerated. Esrethkon stopped. The Thermopylae was not approaching. It was arriving, the distinction being the difference between water filling a vessel and water breaking through it. It crossed into the formation's outer edge at a velocity that forced every Velthari tactical computer to run a simultaneous recalculation, and then its weapons were live, and then everything became very loud and very bright and very fast. Ares had run 40 million simulations. The one Captain Osai chose did not target ships. It targeted formation. Every fired solution had been calculated not to destroy, but to disrupt, to force reactive maneuvers, to create gaps that created further gaps, to turn 200 ships arranged in coherent purpose into 200 ships arranged in controlled chaos. The Thermopylae drove through the center of the Armada, the way a blade driven through the center of a formation opens it, not by destroying the blade, but by committing to it completely. It took damage, real damage. Sections 7 through 9 on the port side took a sustained barrage and vented atmosphere before emergency bulkheads sealed. 13 crew were lost in those sections. Captain Os received each name as they came in. She held each one for exactly 1 second. Then she moved forward. Structural integrity, she said. 78% in holding, Ares said. Starboard drive 4 is degraded. Weapons operational at 91%. Keep moving. For 4 minutes and 33 seconds, the Thermopylae drove through the Grand Armada like a fact that could not be argued with. And then it stopped. Not from damage, not from defeat. Captain Osai gave the order herself, at the precise coordinates Ares had calculated as the geometric center of the remaining formation. They were surrounded, 140 ships, battered, some damaged, but 140 guns pointed at a single hull. Absolute silence on the bridge. Every crew member understood what this meant, understood what she was doing. There was not one of them who did not feel the weight of it, The particular human combination of terror and trust that asks you to hold still when everything in your nervous system screams move. They held still. Ares, Captain Osei said, and her voice carried the quiet of someone who has thought about this moment for a long time. Open broadcast, all frequencies, dominion-wide, everything beyond. Broadcast open, Captain. She did not read from notes. My name is Captain Yara Osei. I command the UNSS Thermopylae United Nations spaceship, Earth. I'm speaking to every Velthari citizen, every crew member, every political leader, every person in this dominion who has a voice. She paused. 3 days ago, Admiral Esreth Khan ordered the destruction of Kepler's Hope. 847,000 human beings died in 12 minutes. They were not soldiers. They were not a military installation. They were families, scientists, teachers, children. Another pause, longer. I want you to hear their names. Ares played the record. All of it, every name. The children's voices from the final 12 minutes of the colony's transmissions, not broadcasts, not distress calls, just the background audio of a place that had been alive. A child asking her mother what was happening. A man singing to himself while he worked. A teacher calling a class to attention. It took 20 minutes. The Grand Armada did not fire. When the record ended, Osei spoke again. We did not come here to conquer you. We are not here for your territory or your resources or to prove something about human strength. We came here because you killed our people and believed we were too young, too small, too new to matter enough to answer for. Her voice did not break. It did not need to. It was carrying something that didn't need the assistance of breaking. You were wrong about that. Everything you see, this ship, this moment, what happened to Sir Varath's fleet, this is what human grief looks like when you give it 17 years to prepare. She looked at the tactical display. 140 ships surrounding her, silent. I am powering down weapons, she said. Right now, openly. A signal to Ares, and the weapon's signature of the Thermopylae dropped to standby, visible on every Velthari sensor in the formation. An offering, a dare. A gesture so audacious it could only come from a species that had decided at some fundamental level that this particular moment was worth dying in rather than leaving. I will remain here, in this position, until someone with the authority to answer for Kepler's Hope comes to this ship and speaks with me. Not as a conquered enemy, not as a supplicant, as a representative of a species that will not, that is not capable of accepting that what happened was acceptable. She paused one final time. We are not asking for war. We are asking for justice, and we are staying right here until we get an answer. The broadcast closed. The bridge was silent except for the quiet sounds of a working ship, the hum of drives at holding, the soft voice of Ares running damage assessments, the distant sound of repair crews moving through the hull. Park stepped up beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. That was a hell of a speech, he said finally. I meant every word. I know. A pause. He glanced at the weapons console, at the 140 ships on the tactical display, none of them moving, all of them silent. What if they don't stand down? She was quiet for a long time. She looked at the name file, still open in the corner of her display. Then we make them remember us, she said. The Thermopylae held its ground. 140 ships held theirs. And no one fired. The silence lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Later, historians would argue about what broke it, whether it was the broadcast, whether it was the spectacle of a damaged human ship sitting calmly at the center of the Grand Armada with its weapons powered down, or whether it was something less dramatic and more human. A conversation, perhaps, between 140 Velthari crews who had just watched a ship drive through the center of their formation, and then stop and play them the voices of the children it had come to answer for. Whatever the cause, Admiral Esreth Khan did not give the order to fire. He sat on the bridge of the Eternal Supremacy for 4 hours and 17 minutes while Veth, small, junior, unofficial, the intelligence analyst no one listened to, stood quietly beside his console and said nothing, did not offer analysis, did not present data, just stood there, in the particular posture of someone who has already said everything they needed to say and is waiting for the room to catch up. At the 4-hour mark, Esreth Khan said, "The broadcast, how wide did it go?" "Every inhabited system in the Dominion received it within 90 minutes, Veth said. "External relay stations picked it up. Neutral space networks are running it continuously. Thessari Compact, Rithali Free Armada, 14 independent systems." He paused. "Sir, it is everywhere." Esreth Khan was quiet for another 17 minutes. Then he stood, tugged the front of his uniform flat, and said, "Prepare a shuttle. I will go to the human ship." No one in the War Council argued. He arrived aboard the Thermopylae in the company of 2 aides and no weapons. Captain Os met him at the docking bay with Lieutenant Commander Park and 2 officers, and the first thing Esreth Khan noticed was that she looked exhausted. Not beaten, exhausted. The exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has not yet been permitted to set it down. He had expected anger. Humanity's reputation for anger was well documented. What he got was quieter than anger, and he would later decide considerably worse. She simply looked at him with the full weight of what he had done, what he had ordered, what he had celebrated, and said, "Thank you for coming, Admiral. Please follow me." She walked him to a room that held, displayed on every wall, the faces of the 847,000. She let him stand there for a while. He was a 4,000-year civilization's highest military officer. He had never, not once in his career, been made to stand in a room and look at what his orders meant. What happened in that room between those 2 people was never fully recorded. What both of them said to each other in that conversation stayed between them and a handful of aides who all, independently, declined to discuss it in any detail. What emerged from it, 3 weeks later, after intense negotiation between human and Velthari diplomatic teams who worked in shifts across 17 days, was a settlement. Reparations, specific, substantial, unprecedented in Velthari history, an empire that had never paid for anything now paying for something, in the most public and unambiguous terms available. A new treaty governing interaction between human space and Dominion territory. A war crimes tribunal convened to assess the specific chain of command decisions that had led to Kepler's hope. A process that was, by Velthari standards, revolutionary, and by human standards, long overdue. Esreth Khan was removed from command within a month. He did not resist it. Something had shifted in him in that room with the faces on the walls, and whatever the shift was, it had quietly removed his appetite for the kind of power he had spent his career accumulating. Veth resigned his commission. He spent 2 years writing a memoir that he published to moderate success among alien political scientists and extraordinary, viral success among humans, who found in his accounts of watching the Thermopylae's blip approach on his sensor screen an oddly moving portrait of the moment a galaxy recalibrated itself. His opening line became something of a quote: "We looked at them and saw children. We forgot that children grow up. We forgot what they had survived to reach the stars in the first place." Commander Drex of the Rithali Free Armada secured a human contract within 2 months. He would later say, in a candid interview, that it was the most straightforward business decision he'd ever made. Ambassador Quell filed a 200-page analysis with the Thessari Compact Security Council. Its conclusion occupied 1 paragraph, which read, in part, "Humanity is not a young species in any meaningful sense. They are an old species with new technology, and the galaxy should govern itself accordingly." Dr. Mara Solis was 71 years old when the broadcast played on her screen in Cartagena. She watched all of it: the approach, the engagement with Sir Verath's fleet, the drive through the Grand Armada, the broadcast from the center of 140 ships. She sat in her garden, where the bougainvillea had grown over the garden wall and the light was doing the particular warm golden thing it did in the late afternoon, and she watched her life's work operating in deep space on a screen in her hands. She did not celebrate, did not call anyone, did not post anything on any public network. She made coffee, she sat by the window, She thought about 847,000 names. She thought about her daughter, who was now 26 and studying xenobiology, and who had called her that morning before the broadcast and mentioned that she was applying for a position on a deep space exploration vessel and was nervous about it. Solis had told her to apply. She thought about that conversation now, about the kind of galaxy her daughter would be applying to explore, whether it was different than the one that had existed 3 days ago, before the Thermopylae set out, and whether that difference was enough, and whether enough was something you ever fully achieved or just something you kept moving toward. She decided it was the latter, which had always been true, and drank her coffee. The Thermopylae was repaired over 8 weeks at a deep space facility. Sections 7 through 9 were rebuilt. The 13 crew members lost in the engagement were honored in a ceremony that the entire ship attended, and that Captain Osai conducted with the same quiet steadiness she brought to everything, and that left very few dry eyes in the assembly, and none at all when she read the last name. She was offered promotion to admiral. She declined. She sent back a one-sentence message to Earth Command. "I'd like to stay on the ship if that's acceptable." It was accepted. 14 months after Kepler's Hope, the Thermopylae returned to deep space. Different heading, new mission, the specific, careful, thoroughly human business of exploration, of moving toward the unknown with instruments and curiosity, and the abiding, characteristic belief that the next thing over the horizon is worth the journey. Park found her at the observation deck as they passed out of charted space. "You know," he said, leaning on the railing beside her, looking at the stars, "there are going to be songs about this." "I know. Probably bad ones." "Almost certainly." He was quiet for a moment. She was quiet. The stars were very close from the observation deck, the way they always were out here, past the last light of the last settled system, in the clear dark of unmapped space. "Are you okay?" he asked. He meant it in the specific way of someone who has known you long enough to ask the real question behind the question. She considered it honestly. She thought about 13 names, about 847,000 names, about a room where an admiral stood and looked at faces and, maybe, slightly, in whatever partial way such things happen, understood. She thought about the armada, surrounding them, silent, not firing. About the moment she had powered down the weapons and sat in the middle of 140 guns and waited, and what it had required of her to do that and to mean it. "I will be," she said. Park nodded. They stood together a while longer, looking at the unmapped dark ahead. The Thermopylae moved forward. Not because the galaxy had become safe, not because justice was complete or grief was finished or the work was done, but because that was what you did, what they had always done, this strange, stubborn, heartbroken, brilliant, impossible species. You looked at the dark and you moved toward it because the alternative was to stop, and stopping was the one thing humanity had never, in 10,000 years of trying circumstances, managed to do. The stars held still. The ship moved on. And somewhere in the quiet dark of Velthari space, in a database no one had deleted, a sensor contact file still existed. A single blip, timestamp attached, moving at an impossible speed in a straight line, without hesitation, without deviation, toward whatever came next. Someone had labeled it simply, in the Velthari administrative language, in the flat bureaucratic terminology of an empire that dealt in reports and assessments and incident logs. The label read, "Do not repeat the conditions that created this contact." Beneath it, added by hand by Veth, on his last day before he turned in his credentials, in small, careful letters. "They will not stop. They have never stopped. We should have known that from the beginning. It was always there, in everything they built and everywhere they went. They are a species that looks at the impossible and begins calculating how long it will take. We should have been afraid of that. Instead, we gave them a reason to aim it at us. Do not do this again." And